I am a 36-year-old woman named Erica Lawson, and if you had asked me 10 years ago what word defined me in my family, I would have said invisible. Not unloved exactly, though love in my house was conditional, doled out like an allowance, always dependent on how much you achieved or how well you kept quiet. I grew up in a family where my brother Corey could do no wrong, where his smallest victories were magnified into legendary feats, while my own accomplishments were tucked away into silence. My parents didn't see me as their daughter with dreams, talent, or potential. To them, I was background noise. And later, when life forced me to step in and give them more than I had, they had the audacity to call me something that still rattles in my chest even today: a burden. When I was young, I discovered I had a gift for design. I could sketch, paint, shape things in a way that made people pause, feel, remember. My teachers noticed. They'd praise me in front of the class, display my work in the hallways. At home, I would quietly lay a finished drawing on the kitchen counter, hoping maybe my mom would stop chopping vegetables long enough to say something like, "This is beautiful, Erica." Instead, she would glance, once shrug, and ask if I'd cleaned my room. Meanwhile, Corey, 2 years older and constantly chasing sports trophies and business ideas even as a teenager, had a shrine in the living room dedicated to his pictures and awards. It was always Corey, this Corey that. He was the investment, the son who'd one day carry the family name into greatness. And me, I was the daughter who was supposed to stay small, quiet, obedient. The one who shouldn't ask for too much. The one who should be grateful just to belong. But I didn't stay small. I couldn't. I left for college in Missoula with only partial scholarships and a deep ache in my chest. Every dollar mattered, and I worked late shifts at a cafe while sketching designs on napkins during my breaks. I studied graphic design, but my heart belonged to fashion, patterns, textures, the way fabric could tell stories words couldn't. It was grueling, but for the first time in my life, I felt like I was shaping something that was mine. My parents didn't come to my graduation. They said Corey had a big presentation for his startup that same week, and they couldn't miss it. I swallowed the hurt like I always did. Fast forward a few years, I built a name for myself. I started small, doing freelance design, then landed a chance to showcase my work in a local art collective. People started noticing. My clothes pieces, inspired by Montana's wild landscapes, stitched with emotion, sold faster than I could make them. I saved every penny, lived in a tiny apartment above a noisy bar, and kept grinding. Eventually, my designs caught the attention of bigger galleries and then magazines. Missoula might not be Paris or New York, but for me, it became the place where I rose. And yet, no matter how far I climbed, my parents' voices lingered in the back of my mind. They never called to congratulate me when I opened my boutique. They never once asked, "Are you happy, Erica?" What they did do, however, was call the moment they needed something. It was 2020. My boutique was finally turning a solid profit despite the chaos of the world. One night my phone rang and I saw my father's name flashing across the screen. It startled me. He never called unless it was serious. His voice was heavy. "Erica, we're in trouble. The business, the house. We need money." They told me Corey had made some risky investments with the family's company. They were drowning in debt, foreclosure looming. And for the first time in my life, my parents weren't invincible. They sounded desperate. For a moment, I felt something strange, vindication maybe, but then guilt crashed over me. They were my parents. They were losing everything. Against my better judgment, I wired them $250, 000, almost every cent I had saved. I told myself I was doing the right thing, that maybe this would finally make them see me, finally hear me. Maybe they'd say, "We're proud of you, Erica." But instead, a week later, I overheard my mother's voice on speakerphone while she thought she was muted. She said, "I can't believe we had to beg our burden of a daughter for this. Thank God for Corey. If he gets back on his feet, we won't have to rely on her again." A burden. after giving them everything I had, after saving their home, their business, their pride. Something inside me shattered that day, but another part of me woke up. The word burden clung to me like smoke. I tried to shake it off, tried to tell myself that my mother had spoken out of stress, out of fear. But the more I replayed her tone in my head, sharp, dismissive, disgusted, the more it burned. It wasn't just a careless word. It was what she truly believed. What they had always believed. I thought about every moment of my life when I had sat quietly in the background while Corey soaked in the spotlight. Every dinner where I was asked about my day only as a formality before the conversation was redirected back to Corey's latest accomplishment. Every holiday where my gifts were politely accepted and set aside while his were cherished and praised. I realized then that I had spent my entire life trying to earn a place that was never mine to begin with. I didn't confront them right away. Instead, I withdrew. I stopped answering their calls, stopped visiting. I poured myself into my work. My boutique became not just a business, but my sanctuary. People came in and told me how my designs made them feel alive, bold, beautiful. Strangers saw value in me that my own blood never could. It was bittersweet. Months passed. The silence from my parents grew louder, but I didn't break it. Then out of nowhere, they showed up at my shop. I remember it vividly. My mother stood in the doorway in her perfectly pressed blazer, my father behind her looking worn and smaller somehow. For a moment, they looked like ghosts. "We need to talk," my mother said. They told me the $250,000 hadn't been enough. The business had collapsed anyway. The house was already gone. They were living in a cramped rental on the outskirts of town, embarrassed to show their faces. Corey had fled, chasing yet another opportunity, leaving them stranded. And now they were asking me to do the unthinkable, to buy back their house. The very house I grew up in. The house that had never felt like home to me. The house where my dreams were silenced, where my tears were ignored, where I was made to feel less than. They wanted me to rescue it for them. I just stared at them, my hands trembling, my throat dry. My father's eyes pleaded with me while my mother's voice was still laced with the same cold entitlement I had known all my life. "You're doing so well, Erica. You can afford this. Family helps family." Family, the word tasted bitter. I finally asked them something I had never dared to before. Why is it that Corey is always the golden child, and I am nothing more than your afterthought? Why is it that when I give you everything, you still call me a burden? The silence that followed was suffocating. My father looked away, unable to answer. My mother sighed as if I were being dramatic. And then she said the words that broke me in a way I didn't expect. "Because you were never supposed to be the one we relied on. That's Corey's role. You were extra. We never thought you'd amount to much. Extra, not essential, not cherished, just unnecessary." Something inside me hardened. I realized then that no amount of money, no amount of sacrifice, no amount of begging for scraps of love would ever change how they saw me. They would always see me as less, as someone to use, as someone to discard when convenient. So I told them no. It was the hardest word I had ever spoken in my life. My voice shook, but I said it again, firmer this time. "No, I will not buy back the house. I will not keep fixing what you and Corey broke. I will not set myself on fire to keep you warm anymore." My mother's face twisted with fury, my father's with disappointment. They left without another word, the bell above my boutique door ringing like a final note of closure. I collapsed onto the floor after they were gone, sobbing until my chest ached. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like death. But somewhere beneath the grief there was also a strange, quiet relief. For the first time in my life, I had chosen myself. The weeks that followed were a blur of emotions I could barely name. Anger, grief, guilt, and something close to freedom all collided inside me. I woke up some mornings with a lump in my throat so heavy I could hardly breathe, haunted by the look on my father's face when I told him no. Other mornings, I felt an almost intoxicating sense of power. I had finally stood up to them, finally broken the cycle of bending until I nearly snapped. But with that freedom came loneliness. I had always been estranged in spirit from my family, but this was different. This was final. There were no phone calls, no texts, no half-hearted invitations to family gatherings. I was cut off completely. For them, I was deadweight finally cast aside. For me, it was a morning I hadn't prepared for because, no matter how toxic someone is when they're your family, a piece of you still aches to belong. My boutique became my lifeline. I expanded my collections, collaborated with local artists, and hired 2 assistants. Customers poured in drawn, not just to the designs, but to the story behind them. I didn't advertise it, but word spread the woman who built beauty from brokenness, who stitched resilience into fabric. People told me my clothes made them feel powerful, and in a strange way, they were helping me feel the same. It was during this season that I met Daniel. He was a photographer who wandered into my shop one rainy afternoon, camera slung around his neck, water dripping from his jacket. He was supposed to shoot landscapes, but he couldn't stop staring at the colors and textures hanging on my racks. "These are alive," he said, running his hand lightly over a jacket. It was the first time anyone had described my work that way, and I felt something stir in me. Daniel saw me in a way my family never did. He asked about my process, my inspiration, my dreams. He didn't talk over me or dismiss my answers. He listened, and slowly, over countless late-night coffees and long walks along the river, he became the first person in my adult life to feel like home. With him, I could exhale. But even as love bloomed, the wounds of my past festered. I couldn't fully enjoy his warmth without hearing echoes of my mother's voice in the back of my head, burden extra unnecessary. I confessed this to him one night, my hands trembling as I admitted how deep the scars ran. He took my hand and said something I'll never forget. "Erica, your worth doesn't decrease because they couldn't see it. It shines brighter because you found it in spite of them." That night, I let myself believe him. Just a little. Months turned into a year, and the distance from my family grew wider. Occasionally, news about them reached me through old neighbors or mutual acquaintances. I heard that my parents had sold off their remaining assets and moved to a smaller town an hour away. I heard Corey had declared bankruptcy and was bouncing between short-lived jobs. The empire they once bragged about was crumbling brick by brick, and then came the moment that twisted the knife deeper than I expected. I received a letter, handwritten shaky, from my father. In it, he admitted that they had been wrong about me. He said they had raised Corey to believe the world owed him, and in doing so, they had blinded themselves to the daughter who had been strong all along. He asked if I could forgive them, if I could at least come visit, if only once. I stared at that letter for hours. Part of me wanted to run to them to finally hear the words I had longed for all my life. "We were wrong. You are worthy." But another part of me knew better. Regret doesn't always equal change, and I had built too much, grown too far to risk being pulled back into the cycle of their taking and my giving until nothing of me remained. So I didn't answer right away. I tucked the letter into a drawer where it sat like a weight I couldn't carry or release. And then one evening, as Daniel and I were closing up the boutique, the phone rang. When I answered, it was Corey. His voice was rough, almost unrecognizable. He said words that froze me in place. "Dad's in the hospital. Mom's a mess. They need you." The sound of Corey's voice after so long was like hearing an old wound being ripped open. He hadn't called me in years, not even when my boutique made it into regional magazines or when my designs were showcased in New York. He had vanished after the family business collapsed, only to resurface now because he needed something. The pattern was painfully familiar. "Dad's in bad shape." Corey continued his words, hurried, almost frantic. "Heart attack. The doctors say it's serious. Mom can't handle it alone. You're the only one who can help right now. For a moment, I couldn't even respond. My throat closed, my chest pounded. Images of my father flashed in my mind, stern, quiet, distant, but still my father. The man who never came to my shows, never said he was proud of me, yet still wrote me that letter, his one attempt at something like remorse. I wanted to scream at Corey to demand why it was always me who had to clean up the wreckage, why it was never him. Instead, I said nothing. Silence stretched across the line until he muttered almost bitterly, "You've always been better at holding things together. Just do it this one time." And then he hung up. I sat there staring at the phone, feeling Daniel's hand slowly resting on my shoulder. "You don't owe them this," he said softly, as if reading the war inside me. But I couldn't silence the ache. No matter how much I had hardened myself, no matter how much I told myself I was done, a part of me still carried the little girl who had once waited desperately for her parents' approval. So I went. Walking into that hospital was like stepping back into a life I thought I had left behind. My mother was in the waiting room, her hair disheveled, her face pale. When she saw me, her expression flickered between relief and something colder like pride, swallowed. "Erica," she whispered as if my name was an afterthought. "You came." She didn't hug me. She didn't thank me. She just led me to my father's room. He lay there, tubes and machines surrounding him, his once commanding presence reduced to fragile breaths. Seeing him like that broke something in me I didn't know was still whole. He opened his eyes when I entered, and for a second there was clarity. His lips trembled, and in a voice I had never heard from him before, soft, vulnerable, he said, "I'm sorry." That was it. 2 words. But they sank deeper than I expected. I wanted to demand more. Sorry for what? For dismissing me. For calling me a burden. For choosing Corey at every turn. But the weight of those machines, the fragility of his body told me I wouldn't get a list. This was all he had to give. I sat by his bed for hours, holding his hand, watching him drift in and out of sleep. My mother hovered occasionally, glancing at me as if trying to gauge what role I would play in this new version of our family drama. Would I be the savior again? Would I sign papers, pay bills, fix the mess? But this time I couldn't. When the doctors explained the treatment costs and hinted at financial struggles, I felt my mother's eyes burn into me. "You can help," she said firmly, almost accusingly. "You've always been the one with money now." And in that moment, I saw it clearly. Nothing had changed. My father's apology was real, but small, a sliver of humanity in the face of mortality. But my mother's heart was untouched. To her, I was still a means to an end. The cycle was waiting to pull me back in. So I stood, my legs shaking but steady. "I came to say goodbye," I told her. "Not to fix this. Not anymore." Her face contorted fury, mixing with disbelief. "How can you abandon us now after everything we gave you?" I almost laughed through the tears stinging my eyes. "Everything you gave me. You gave me silence, dismissal, and the belief that I wasn't enough. But I learned to turn that into something beautiful. And I'm not giving it back to you." I kissed my father's forehead, whispered a goodbye he might never hear, and walked out of that hospital. My mother's voice followed me down the hall, sharp and shrill, but I didn't look back. Daniel was waiting in the car. The moment I slid into the passenger seat, I broke. I sobbed until my body ached, until there was nothing left but exhaustion. And when the tears finally stopped, I felt something unexpected: peace. Because for the first time in my life, I hadn't just chosen myself. I had defended her. The days after leaving that hospital felt like walking on a tightrope between grief and liberation. I would wake in the middle of the night, guilt gnawing at me. Had I abandoned my father in his final hours? Was I cruel for refusing to shoulder the financial burden once again? Then, just as quickly, a voice inside me would remind me of the truth: I had already given them everything, more than they ever gave me. And still, it was never enough. A week later, I received the call. My father was gone. I didn't go to the funeral. That decision still aches even now. But I knew if I stood there in black, surrounded by relatives who only ever whispered about me as the daughter who strayed too far, I would crumble. And I had come too far to lose myself again. Instead, I lit a candle in my boutique that morning, placed it by the window, and sat in silence as customers browsed quietly. It was my private goodbye, one he would never see, but one that felt truer than any graveside ceremony. Corey called me a few days later. His voice was venomous this time. "You broke Mom. Do you know that she says you killed Dad with stress with your selfishness? You could have helped Erica. You had the money. But you let him die." I nearly dropped the phone, his words slicing through me. But then I steadied myself. I took a deep breath and said, "No, Corey. Dad's choices, your choices, Mom's choices, they all led here. I didn't kill him. I just stopped killing myself for you." And I hung up before he could spit more poison into my ear. That was the last time I spoke to either of them. Corey faded back into the chaos of his own undoing, and my mother, from what little I hear, lives in a small rental on the edge of town, bitter and unyielding, still telling anyone who will listen that I am the reason for her fall from grace. Perhaps that's her truth. It will never be mine. Because my truth is this: I am no one's burden. Life after that was not a fairy tale. Healing isn't a straight line. There are days when I see a father and daughter laughing over coffee and something sharp twists in my chest. There are nights when I dream of my mother's voice calling me extra and I wake up trembling. Trauma has a way of echoing, of showing up in places you least expect. But alongside the echoes, there is light. My boutique flourished beyond what I ever imagined. Daniel became not just my partner in love, but also in creativity, photographing my designs in ways that captured their soul. We traveled, we collaborated, we built a life stitched from threads of resilience and tenderness. I learned what unconditional love feels like, not the transactional kind my parents offered, but the real grounding kind that makes you feel seen. Sometimes I walk past the old Lawson house. It doesn't belong to us anymore. The lawn is overgrown, the shutters faded, the once proud home sagging under neglect. I don't feel the urge to rescue it anymore. I don't feel guilt. I only feel a quiet understanding some houses are never meant to be saved, and some families will never be what you needed them to be. That realization doesn't erase the pain, but it transforms it. My parents' rejection shaped me, but it did not define me. Their betrayal scarred me, but it did not destroy me. And in the end, the revenge was not in refusing to buy back their house or in walking away from their demands. It was in building a life so whole, so authentic, so mine, that their words no longer have the power to wound me. If you take anything from my story, let it be this: family is not always the people who share your blood. Sometimes family is the community you build, the love. You choose the people who see you when others refused to. And sometimes the greatest act of love you can give yourself is walking away from those who only ever saw you as a burden. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched you, if you've ever felt unseen or undervalued, I hope you'll share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because every story like this reminds us that we are not alone in our pain or in our healing.